as I prayed, I opened my Bible and read these words in Genesis. And the Lord said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy people unto a land that I will show thee. That verse startled me. Here was a man who left everything he knew to go to a strange place because God had told him to. I trusted then that my desire to go to China was from God. And I went back to London, where I could earn more money working as a parlor maid to prepare for the trip. By sheer coincidence, I found employment in the home of a famous explorer, Sir Francis' young husband. He'd not only been to China, he'd written books about it. He was quite amazed that his maid would want to borrow books from his library, but he agreed to let me have 1 book a week. And I read all I could, filling the journal that I'd begun while working for the Fishers with page after page of notes about China. Then the next question was, where in China would I go? Then a lady at church told me about an old friend, a former missionary to China, who'd returned to England when her husband died. But she couldn't be happy in England, and she had just written a letter saying she was praying earnestly for some young person to come join her in the work. That's me. That's me. I said, my voice no louder than a whisper. I was so amazed. But then how was I going to get to China? And I rushed to the shipping office to find out passage of a ship to China, and the clerk told me it was £90, which seemed like a lifetime of earnings to me. But then he said a cheaper way would be to take the train across Europe, Russia, and Siberia. So I hurried to the railway office. The clerk there shook his head in disbelief. Miss, he said, I don't have time for jokes. I'm not joking, I objected. How much is a one-way ticket to China? Well, he looked it up. £47, but there's no point in going. They're fighting over Manchuria. When we sell a railway ticket, we want our passengers to arrive alive, not dead. That is a risk I will take, I said. And I put down all I had, £3 as a deposit on my ticket. I thought, whatever silly war they're having, it'll be over long before I've got the money I need. And it did seem like it would take forever, but strange things started happening. I got extra jobs on my days off. I could sell a few things, and soon my goal was in sight. Thank the Lord, in October 1930, I set off from the Liverpool Street train station. My friends and family had come to say goodbye. My mum had sewn secret pockets in my corset to hold my valuables. I had warm clothes, a fur coat. I had an army blanket tied up to hold a tea kettle and a small stove, and I had a suitcase full of food. The suitcase was full of tea bags, coffee essence, tins of beans and beef, and hard-boiled eggs. It was extremely heavy, but I knew as I ate up my rations it would grow lighter and lighter. My parents unbelievably let me go, knowing how possible it was that I would never see them again. On the train, I was seated across from a distinguished-looking couple, and they commented on the large crowd that had come to see me off. You must be going to meet a young man. No, I said, I don't have a young man. I'm going to China to preach the gospel of salvation through Jesus Christ. They stared at me in awe, but said they were just leaving a Christian conference. They were on their way back to their home in Holland. We grew close to each other as we traveled, and when it came time for them to leave the train, the lady said, My dear, I'm going to make a pact with you. For as long as I live, every night at 9 o'clock, I will pray for you. Her husband reached out his hand to me and said, My dear, may God bless you richly. It was not until the train started up again I realized he'd left a British pound note in my hand. Funny, I thought, to give me British money when I'm going so far from England. I didn't know that later in the journey that pound note would save my life. We went through Europe and Russia and entered Siberia. Never in my life had I seen so much snow. I was feeling quite alone by now. There were no more travelers on the train except soldiers. And at one stop, the conductor came into my compartment and told me I must get off the train there. He said, if you continue, you will not get to China because the line has been blocked by the Japanese. In my fear, I refused to leave the train, praying that God would make a way for that train to continue. And eventually, the conductor gave up on me. The train started up and traveled, and at the next stop, all the soldiers got off. I sat there alone for several hours before I realized that train was going no further. I climbed down and saw a lighted hut where I found the same conductor speaking to some other men in Russian. They started pantomiming guns being fired to indicate that there was a war going on that way, and they motioned that I needed to pick up my bags and walk back that way, which I did. I walked up the railroad track between two great walls of snow. At midnight, I stopped, boiled some water for coffee, ate some stale crackers, climbed on my suitcase and slept. During the night, I could hear the sound of howling and thought it was odd people would leave their dogs out so late. It was much later I realized I'd spent the night in the territory of Siberian wolves. At the first light of dawn, I was on the track again, walking toward my destination, and as night fell, I could see the lights of the village in the background and realized I'd made it back. From there, I was put on a train to Vladivostok, where I witnessed people living in terrible conditions, much as I'd seen from the train all across Russia. I needed help locating a hotel. An interpreter offered to help me, but he demanded my passport. I was grateful for a bed and a place to wash, but when I asked for my passport, he refused to give it to me. He put me off, saying, "Why do you want to leave Russia? We need people like you, people who know about machinery." "I'm a missionary," I said. "I know nothing about machinery." He would not return my passport, and I was feeling quite desperate, and I took a walk away from the hotel. There, a young girl approached me and said I was in grave danger of being sent to a work camp. She told me a man would come to my room that night, and I must follow him if I was to have any hope of escape. So I lay in my bed that night, trembling with anxiety, and when the knock on the door came, it was the interpreter, and in his hand was my passport. I grabbed it from him, threw it on the floor, and said, "You are not coming in here." He said, "I am the interpreter, and I can do as I want." I said, "Oh, no, you can't. You may not believe in God, but he has placed a barrier between me and you cannot cross it." He shivered and laughed. I picked up my passport and saw, indeed, it had been changed to say Gladys, Aylward, machinist. And I knew the girl was right. And I got on my knees to pray for a means to escape. Early in the morning came the tap on the door that she'd promised. A small man had come, and I followed him through the dark, down streets and alleys, to where a ship was moored. The Japanese captain agreed to take me to Japan. But just as I was climbing on the boat, I was surrounded by Russian soldiers. In a moment of inspiration, I pulled that pound note from my pocket, threw it on the dock, and the soldiers all dived to get it, and I was safe on the boat.